Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by the University of Virginia's Assessment of China's Belt and Road Initiative project. I'm Mark Metcalf and I'm a visiting lecturer in global communications at UVA's McIntire School of Commerce, and I'm also a UVA East Asia Center faculty member, and I'll be moderating today's presentation. We thank you for participating in what promises to be a very insightful presentation. It's my great pleasure today to introduce David Day. There's a brief biography for David on the announcement that all of you saw whenever you registered. And I'm not going to repeat that, except to say he's an experienced lawyer with decades of business and trade experience throughout Asia. And he's visited every country in Asia except the DPRK and Myanmar. More importantly, he's the chairman of the American Bar Association's Belt and Road Task Force. And as part of his responsibilities, he developed this 7-part symposium for the ABA to provide Belt and Road context to companies considering Belt and Road engagement. This is from their website, which you're looking at on the screen right now. The symposium speakers that he brought to give talks for his symposia include experts in a variety of topics relevant to the Belt and Road Initiative. Given his expertise and decidedly practical perspectives, we invited David to discuss his perspectives on BRI for our group. Unsurprisingly, the link to today's presentations has also appeared on ABA forums, and we welcome ABA participants. Today's webinar will begin with David's presentation, followed by Q&A from the participants. You can use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen to enter your questions throughout the presentation. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming David Day.
Well, greetings to all of you from the other side of the world, the middle of the Pacific here. And I think that it's one of the things that whether we're talking about China or China's Belt and Road, one of the things that has been noticed by the true China experts is that frequently it doesn't matter which sector you're involved in, whether it's politics or economics, law, academia. Anytime you're going to do an assessment of China or China's Belt and Road, what is really critical is getting the fundamentals straight. And this is where we have found lots of shortcomings. And so on the front end of this presentation, I want to do something to paraphrase for those of you Monty Python, something entirely different here. And that is, I want to emphasize the fundamentals that are very, very critical if you're going to do an analysis or to have any real understanding of China's Belt and Road. And the reason that the fundamentals are important is if you don't have the fundamentals right, then whatever assessment that you do or policy that you develop or risk strategy as a business owner that you take is off kilter. And so the initial fundamental is to really understand the mindset of the leadership in Beijing, the Communist Party, and kind of where they think they're going. And so it's their perception. And so, Mark, if we could go to the next slide, please, I think that'd be really helpful. This is a visual of the way that the People's Republic of China, their leadership and the Communist Party, this is the way that they view their objectives and goals moving forward here. And so you can see on the left side of your screen, the beginnings of trade relationship between the United States and the US. In the beginnings of the famous century of humiliation for China, and the contrary development of the United States as a superpower, and then the beginnings of the PRC in 1949. Now, this is a visual depiction of what um, the leadership in Beijing, what they've told us over and over again. And if you notice, moving forward on that red line from 1949, you get into Xi Jinping's China Dream era. And the crossover point in their view, their goal is by 2049, the 100th year of the foundation of the Communist Party, that they will move into position as the dominant superpower in the world, with the US as a lesser superpower. And that means we are now entering a very dangerous time. Uh, and it is very fundamental. This piece, this is the first piece in terms of fundamentals, that it's critical that you know what their attitude is and where they intend to go. And so that coming up in 2022 here with the Beijing Olympics, this becomes very important for the leadership's face. And we'll have to see where this goes as we move forward here. But if you can just retain this picture as a critical, fundamental analysis of the way that the leadership in China perceives where they're going. This is not necessarily where it is, but this is the way they perceive it. And
David, got a question for you though.
sure.
Does the CCP really believe that this can be achieved, or is it just some kind of aspirational propaganda?
No, they're absolutely certain it is. They're convinced that the U.S. is a declining power. It's essentially falling apart, and they'll be in this position with no problem. And in fact, adding to their excitement is the fact that they were able to accomplish a major goal in taking over Hong Kong much sooner than was anticipated by law.
Okay, thanks.
So what I want to do next is I want you all to focus on that red line from 1949 up to 2074 there. And I want to show you a series of 3 slides in a moment, but listen to me carefully before we do this. The next 3 slides, I have borrowed. They're military slides. The information is publicly available, but they were prepared by Captain James Fennell, who is a retired director of intelligence for the Pacific Fleet. And I want to show you reality, and that is China's development of its hard power. This is its military. And you may not have ever seen this before, but it is part of the fundamentals, is understanding the development of China's military strength and its hard power. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is what it looks like in the year 2000. And you can see that the PLA Navy has basically, an onshore capability there marked in the yellow. And you see the number of short-range ballistic missiles, advanced attack submarines, and advanced fighter aircraft. And so this is where the PLA stood in the year 2000. And I want you to focus on this slide for a second. And this is the reality that we're dealing with here in the Pacific. So let's go to the next slide if we could. We'll jump ahead here to the year 2015 and look at the development of the hard power in China, along with their military spending. Remember those 2 advanced fighter strike aircraft? Look at the difference there. Look at the number of short-range ballistic missiles. And again, this is information prepared by the former director of intelligence for the Pacific Fleet, Jim Fennell. Those brown areas, blotches out in the ocean there, those show the capability developed by the PLA Navy as a brown water Navy, moving out beyond the first island chain. For those of you who don't know, the first island chain comprises those islands out in the Pacific, from Japan down through Taiwan into the Philippines, and on into Indonesia. you'll hear a reference to the second island chain, and that comes down from Japan into the US territory, Guam, and picks up the Marianas and so forth. So this is what it looks like. And you can see that jump in 15 years is significant. Let's rocket forward to the year 2020 now and see what this looks like. And you see a phenomenal development in the hard power that China has advanced. We have seen this. I've seen some of it with my own eyes out here in the Pacific. Again, go back to that. Remember those two lonely advanced fighter strike aircraft back in 2020? Look at the development then, and look at where we are now, or advanced attack submarines, and then the red areas out beyond the first island chain is where China's able to operate with its naval forces, and you'll see there that the three aircraft carriers. So this is the second fundamental that it is important for you to really understand and appreciate when evaluating the Belt and Road. Let's go to the next slide, because the third one is, what is the real Chinese business model look like? And it's important to understand that it is a highly coordinated fusion that we don't see amongst our Western countries, where the civilian sector is merged in with the military sector. And this State-Owned Assets and Supervision Administration Commission, SASAC, is very important that you understand, because the ownership of that or that commission basically covers all of the state-owned enterprises within China. And as a stakeholder, or as we would call it, and think of it as like a stockholder in that SASAC, is the People's Armed Police. Now, here's what's important with this. You've heard references to private companies and private Chinese company, or my firm is working with a private Chinese company. And anybody who tells you that, they don't have their facts straight, because there is no such thing as a truly private company in China, unless it's a little local noodle shop or hair salon or something of that nature. The Communist Party State-Owned Assets Supervision and Administration Commission controls all of the economic activity in the country. And embedded within those state-owned enterprises are the People's Armed Police, and you would see that even in their operations abroad. Here in the US, as an example, the People's Armed Police is present. So this is the third fundamental. And Mark, did you have a question there that you wanted to?
Yeah, actually, I don't see any foreign businesses in there, so they obviously aren't part of the model.
No. And so you would see this same arrangement, whether the company's operations are located within the borders of the People's Republic of China, or they're located in New York.
So how can an American company fit into something like this? Say at Western.
They're not going to. Real easy. Okay, looking at the business model. And you can see the challenge that American or Western firms have when they're going up against an entity that is this well coordinated, like a Swiss watch. But to really understand the firepower that China has developed in terms of its commercial capability, you have to take this business model and then look at China's capacity to execute any project, any plan. And let's go to the next slide to do that. And this is, I think, our fourth fundamental here is those 97 state-owned companies. And I've listed a few of them here. They're managed and owned by this SASAC commission. And these involve essentially millions of employees in various operations. And so that China has an enormous capacity to execute anything it wants to execute. If it needs to throw 100,000 people into a project, no problem at all. The other piece that I would emphasize here is that the domestic issue within China now is jobs, jobs, jobs. And part of the Belt and Road is a 21st century colonial exercise where they can export their develop jobs as well as tie down much needed resources. And so you can see the tremendous commercial firepower that US or Western firms are up against. Let's go to the next slide, because this is an important aspect of understanding China, and that is the economy. How does the economy operate? And in the middle of your slide there, if you can visualize the border of China, what happens is that China is an export-driven economy. The only way it earns foreign exchange is by exporting. So dollar in, dollar out. And internally within the country is you see the RMB or yuan currency, and it's used internally, and never the twain shall meet. Interestingly, there's the remittance from RMB earnings out to dollars is controlled by the State Administration for Foreign Exchange, which I love the acronym there, SAFE. And so if you look at this picture, one of the things that should be apparent to you is, well, what's happened in this COVID situation? Well, if China's export markets are down, ask yourself, how do they earn dollars? They're down. And so that's why you see Xi Jinping saying, we're going to convert to our internal economy. Well, what a number of the so-called experts like Morgan Stanley and others, Bloomberg, they say, well, you know, they've got a 1.4 billion consumer base. They'll just flip this around. No, 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 no. It doesn't work that way. They can't flip this around because those two sections of the economy are separate. They were built separately. So the factories that export have different quality controls, different standards, different marketing, different packaging. And it's possible over time to do that, but it's not like flipping a light switch and just selling the same product internally. It doesn't work that way. So this is another important fundamental that you should bear in mind. Let's go to the next slide if we could, because.
Can I ask one question before we do?
Sure, sure, sure.
And that is, you know, what happens whenever a company responds to China's call for, a Western company call for foreign direct investment? How does that play in here?
All right. So what happens in that situation is that that's the bypass of the export. And what happens then, whether that is a investment in dollars into China, or it comes by way of your investment mark. As an example, let's say you buy stock in China Telecom on one of the exchanges. Then effectively you're enhancing China's ability to export. Those dollars are going into China. And the trick then for the Western firms that have been doing business in China is, how do you get those how do you convert that RMB and get it out? How do you take out your profits? And that is a huge, huge problem. Some companies can do an offset on their balance sheets. Some just show they're making money in China, but it doesn't really, it's not that easy to pull it out, and especially in this post-COVID era. Okay, now we've looked at the economy here, and there's one other very sophisticated aspect, which is a fundamental to understanding and assessing China and its Belt and Road. And if we could go to the next slide, please. And that is China's, I call it political warfare. And this is the sophisticated disinformation campaigns, the control of social media that the Communist Party through its state council and the party's central committee controls. And this is essentially a map of the way that this is set up. And you see on the outer rim there some references to educational institutions and scholar associations and so forth that are tied in here if you're involved in the academic world, which should be of interest to you. But I'd like you to focus on that red arrow for a second at your 11 o'clock position. You see from the Central Propaganda Department a direction that's going to a group called, it's a state-owned enterprise, China Publishing Group. And from China Publishing Group owns a large state-owned enterprise called China Translation Group. And then you'll see an outfit called Global Tone Communications. Now I'm using this as a little case study to illustrate one of the really insidious aspects of the Belt and Road. And the Belt and Road involves, hard assets like rail and infrastructure and so forth. But there's a big digital component to that. And this Global Tone Communications is heavily involved in the digital side, which is tied back into the party's concern for its national security all over the world. And so let's take a look at this Global Tone Communications just as an example, because I want you to understand this. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Whoops, back, there we go. So this Global Tone Communications is you've just seen is a state-owned enterprise tied back into the Central Committee and through the Propaganda Department. And it has a US operation based in Santa Clara, California, along with a number of other operations in various places in China and around the world. And the reason I've highlighted this for you is that this particular operation is doing some very scary or insidious, depending upon your perspective. You get one of the two, but what they're doing is they're pulling in all kinds of unstructured data. They built an amazing ecosystem all over the world. And then they've used artificial intelligence to develop tools for translation of that. And then they can generate that information to really build on the national security of the Communist Party. And from that, they're building coercive tools to shape public opinion and control, not just in China. Please understand me here. This is not just a China situation. The purpose of this is to assist the Communist Party in its drive for global governance. Remember that first slide, Mark? You remember that where they were going? Well, global governance is a piece of being the dominant superpower, because the dominant superpower, means that China will control the institutions of global governance and make changes in the rule of law. So for you lawyers that are watching this particular program, the rule of law that you currently enjoy may not be the same once China takes the dominant position here. One of the tools that was created by this global tone communications, by the way, just so you know, they're partnered with Huawei and Alibaba Cloud, just so you get that connection. And just understand that when that data is combined with artificial intelligence processing, what they do is they can build tools that can be used to shape, to manage, and to control thought. And that includes propaganda tools and the social credit system and social media with all their bots and Twitter and so forth. And so you should know that this GT comms tool, one of them they created was called Language Box. And it is already a de facto tool in Huawei's intelligent conference rooms, Huawei conferencing solutions, and equipment provided for the African Union headquarters. And in that situation, the data was allegedly stolen every single day for 5 years between 2012 and 2017. And it's a very insidious development aspect of the Belt and Road. Go ahead.
As I'm looking at these slides, I obviously had advanced access to them, and as I was looking through them, one of the things that really jumped out at me was this just really screams the whole idea of China's three warfares that they announced a decade and a half ago. The idea being that during peacetime, you're still preparing the battlefield for doing what you need to do for national security. And there are three basic tenets of it. One is psychological warfare against the military. One is lawfare, which we've seen, using legal systems and manipulating legal systems to do what needs to be done for national security. And then finally, what they call media or public opinion warfare. And that's focused on you and me. It's focused on people who, read the news, who read Global Times, so on and so forth. And it looks like this is just kind of feeding right back into that whole idea of media or public opinion warfare.
Well, you're absolutely right, Mark. And I think one of the things that we as Americans have been very naive about is that when the Berlin Wall came down, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's 1989, there was great jubilation in the West that the Cold War was over. And a couple of years later, we were engaged in Gulf War I. And if you recall, in that situation, the US military was decimating Iraq's military. And at that time, China was looking to Iraq as an example of a successful, strong military. And they saw the US military cut through Iraq's military like a hot knife through butter. And it alarmed them. And there were two PLA colonels that wrote a very important manifesto about the upgrades that the PLA needed to make. And we have seen earlier in the slides here the progress that the PLA has made. But among the strategies that were developed was this concept of the three warfares, which you've just mentioned. And so I think there are many, many minds greater than mine who take the position, and I agree with them, that we have thought that we have been at peace And that's because the landing crafts have not been coming up on the beach there at Virginia Beach or Stinson Beach in San Francisco or here at Waikiki. We haven't seen landing crafts or kinetic activity. But the truth of the matter is that China has been at war with us. And it's just a non-kinetic, different type of warfare. And we see it in the China Watch section of the Washington Post, the China daily newspaper that you can pick up virtually every street corner in downtown parts of many American cities. And we've seen it with the bots and various social media exercises on Twitter and other social media. In fact, the whole issue of the lockdowns throughout the United States in response to COVID, there were tremendous campaigns initiated by China to encourage governors to do that on social media through fake names and so forth. So this issue of media influence is enormous in our own country. But imagine what it would be if you looked at it on a global scale, because that's what China is doing. And so when we go to a picture of the Belt and Road, what does the Belt and Road really look like? Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is a global map, and I want to call your attention to two things here. First, the red areas on this map depict those countries that have signed on board with China for its Belt and Road. So what is that? That's something like 140 countries around the world. And the oval circle there is depicts the US, Canada, and Mexico. And so the reason for that is, Mark, if you and I went to the southern US border, pick your location, Nogales, Yuma, Arizona, something like that, and you and I stood and looked across the border, I would tell you, you are looking into Mexico, and that is the only real significant country in all of Central, South, and South America and the Caribbean that is not heavily engaged with China or the Belt and Road. And to be sure, there are lots of Chinese investments in Mexico. And so what the other piece I want to underscore for you here is this is only a partial map. And why is that? It leaves out all of the very, very strategic island countries, whether they be you can see a few of them in the Caribbean there, but throughout the Pacific that provide strategic options for China in the future. And so when we talk about the Belt and Road, it's not, I think the piece that has troubled me the most is so many of our think tanks and researchers are focused on the Belt and Road as an infrastructure project. No. That's just the wrapping around the package, the ribbon, if you will. The deep purpose within that for the Belt and Road is to set the PRC up for its goals, which is to become the dominant superpower. And how do they do that? Well, they're exporting their influence by way of jobs, extractive resources, debt diplomacy. You've seen references to that throughout, and the digital side of things, and a lot of people don't understand that on the digital side, Mark, what happens is that when China obtains control of the internet or telecommunications backbone of a country, they will control the ability of American firms to participate in that country's economy because the standards will be Chinese. They won't be American standards. And so this battle in the tech field becomes a very important one of market exclusion. So to the extent in the years to come that China further develops its Belt and Road, some of our American firms, along with other Western firms that operate in certain international markets, are going to find themselves foreclosed out of that market. They won't be able to participate. And we've seen one of the producers of rail cars in the Carolinas that used to sell and export rail cars into Africa closed out because the Chinese have taken over in that country, and that company's business has been ended in that part of the world. So this is something we'll see, but it's important to understand that the Belt and Road is very pervasive, and it has some very insidious aspects which have been overlooked by many researchers, most of our think tanks, and even our intelligence services and government leadership. It's very different.
Looking at this slide, there are a couple questions that I have. First one is going back to some of your earlier slides on the PLA Navy and how they've gone from a coastal to a near seas to a blue water Navy. Would you comment on overlaying those developments on this map?
Well, sure. What you have are the development of options for moving that military way beyond that map that I showed you that had a 2020 date on it. And so as an example, in the island country of Samoa, not American Samoa, but Samoa, China has embarked on a massive extension and development of their international airport. And I suggest to you that Samoa does not have the level of tourism to justify that type of expansion. But in the future, that becomes a potential base of operations for the PLA Air Force. The same is true with port development in Fiji. If we come to our America's situation, Mark, we see the developments through the Belt and Road in terms of port development in El Salvador, on both sides of the Panama Canal, which Chinese SOEs control, by the way, as well as the socialist countries of Cuba and Venezuela. We see developments in construction that are potential precursors to military installations in the future, just like they did with Djibouti, as an example.
Okay. Another question, looking at South America, what's their rationale for expanding BRI activities into South America? Or has BRI just simply become a new term for foreign aid?
South America provides the opportunity to answer a slightly different question. And that is that the PRC, China has depleted much of its natural resources. And so like their dealings with Australia, arrangements with various countries in Argentina, like in Argentina as an example, set up extractive arrangements for important minerals and other natural resources. But the Americas are also an opportunity for them to export jobs. And you've got large populations, so they've got a consumer base that China can sell products to. But always remember, that's in our own home territory. And so it provides opportunities for China to create influence and potential hard power military installations if need be. And the final thing here is remember, if the goal is global governance, then what you're doing is as you add these 140 countries, you essentially have got influence over them, and you've got votes in the United Nations. And so that's why, as just as one little example, you will never see a UN resolution condemning China on its genocide or treatment of the Uyghur population in Western China. Why? Because China has control there. And you can see the same influence with the World Health Organization or the UN Human Rights Council, as China has begun to use this Belt and Road as a means of lashing these countries to it, kind of like the Captain Ahab situation.
Okay, one final question on this slide, and that is a lot of the time that a lot of the time China rationalizes Belt and Road and going to specific countries based on their historical narrative, saying we're reconstructing China's glory, and we're reconstructing the Silk Road and so on and so forth. That doesn't seem to apply to the Polar Silk Road. What's up with the Polar Silk Road?
Well, this is something that I think is a very, very interesting concept. And so it's not shown on this map, but if you can imagine, a line that goes from the upper right part of the blue in China, and then circles around through the Arctic. If you follow, you're doing a great job here, Mark, by the way. Through the Arctic, and then comes into essentially into Scandinavia. What that is a shorter bypass route for getting into Europe, doing deals with Europe or moving product into Europe. And there was just a news item today that in the dead of winter here, that using a nuclear powered icebreaker, the Russians moved through the ice in the Arctic. Took them 11 days, and there was a big cargo ship that followed them through to prove this. Now, here's what's very ticklish about the Arctic Silk Road, and that is that if you were to look at the globe, and we don't have the map in front of us, but from the top view, you would see that the Arctic Silk Road passes very, very close to the very northernmost provinces of Canada. And so that there is a debate now within Canada. What are we going to do about this? How should we respond? And what if China wants to start extracting resources in the Arctic? And we've got economic development that we could do in our northern provinces, but that would be aligning ourselves with China, and then that affects the relationship with the United States and so forth. So that this Arctic Silk Road or ice road, Mark, there are a lot of permutations and combinations that make it very, very touchy and very complex.
Thanks. Those are the three for this slide that I had.
Okay. Well, let's do a summary piece here. Let's go to the next slide here, because I think that I wanted to underscore for all of you that it's important that you always, when you're trying to assess a project or assessing the risks having to do with China or one of China's SOEs, bear in mind the massive capacity that they can to pour into an operation. And always remember always remember the ambition or the goal, where China is going with this. They've said this over and over again, and you've got to understand that the Belt and Road is not simply an infrastructure project. It is a tactical tool to get to that goal in a lot of different ways, and I hope that we've laid out that so it's clear here. And the drive for China to become dominant on the tech side, well, if you take that that drive and you call it the digital Silk Road, and you understand both capability as well as capacity, then think of these developing countries on the Belt and Road and their ability to get in and run the internet background or telecommunications background. And then the final point is there are enormous influence operations, political warfare, these three warfares that you talked about, that the Communist Party is leveling against these Belt and Road countries as well as our own country. And the purpose is so that they can control the public opinion and public discourse. And it's a very, very insidious operation. And so I'll be happy to take whatever questions you've got at this juncture.
I've got a couple more and then I'll open it up. We have quite a few questions that people have been typing in. Thank you. Please keep those coming. First couple, let me play devil's advocate. How do you respond to people who say you're just being paranoid? Sure, the PRC's practices are different than those in the West, but BRI really isn't anything more than a foreign aid program.
Well, if it were a foreign aid program, then what you would see is a follow-up. That is, that where there's a promise to do something, they would always inject the money. But I think that's pardon the word, Mark, but I think that's a very naive assessment of what we're looking at. It's denying reality, and I think that if you were a business person on the ground and you're up against one of the large state-owned companies and trying to do a bid on a project for in a particular country, you would find it's not just a foreign aid program. There's a quid pro quo involved in that, to the extent that it's grant money. Normally, China does not do aid or grant stuff. They're in a loan situation. So that's very different than our notion of foreign aid, where you go in for humanitarian reasons. And to be fair, in this COVID era, we've seen China do some medical support and so forth that looks like foreign aid.
Yeah. Along the same lines, over the last year, China scored a lot of own goals in terms of public relations. And I'd say an increasing number of people have questioned the veracity of official statistics and information coming from the PRC, like COVID-19 statistics or economic statistics. If we're considering, fewer people are trusting this information, why should we be concerned about misinformation from the PRC?
Well, the short answer to that is that, the misinformation coming from the PRC, you may not buy it, you may not follow it, but for every one of you, Mark, there are tens or hundreds of thousands of people that do. And so just because it doesn't influence you doesn't mean it's not having an impact. And as we begin to understand and work more in this field of influence operations, we'll begin to see the impact. And it's, in a lot of ways, it's very subtle. It's not something that's always in your face, that's easy to discern. And I come back to this example of all of the social media efforts that were leveled at various US governors to push the concept, or encourage, if I can use that word, the concept of COVID lockdowns. Now, that might have been the right procedure, or it may not have been, but the point is that they were in the fight, operating to influence public opinion.
Yeah. So I have some more general questions for a few minutes. And I guess the first one is, based on your experience, what are the main things US companies don't get about BRI?
they don't understand those fundamentals that I laid out here almost to a T. I mean, every time I've given a talk or involved in a discussion, um, there are raised eyebrows. Well, I didn't know this. How come I don't know this? Is typically the question, and my response is that, well, that has to do with your sources of information and where you get it. But the information is out there. China brags about this. It's not a secret. It's just that companies. It's the American culture, Mark, that our companies are run on a quarterly balance sheet. They're looking for short-term gains, and they're not trained. And our culture is not such that we take the long game, we take the long view, and so they are both reluctant and in many cases unable to see what's out over the horizon. And part of the reason is they don't want to see it because they think they're making money at the moment, or they've got a good deal going, and so that's all they need to worry about. But that's part of the role of educators, is to lay out the truth unvarnished, as painful as it may be, because only then do we as a country have a chance to handle it in some fashion.
Okay, so that's businesses. What about the government? What doesn't the government get, US government get about BRI?
I would say that as a consequence of the so-called trade or tariff war that was initiated in the prior administration, there has been some education about the unfair trade practices and the nefarious activities of the Communist Party in our government. I think it's fair to say that the fundamentals that we've talked about here are certainly not universally understood or appreciated. So the US government suffers from many of the same knowledge or information gaps that our private sector does. And of course, then you have the cultural factor that kicks in there. This is a massive problem. And we had 40 years of an engagement with the People's Republic of China, and reversing that or making modifications to that is not going to be easy. You are a former Navy guy. It's sort of the difference in the turning radius of an outboard water ski boat versus an aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier comes around real slow, and the difference is that the who's ever at the helm on the aircraft carrier has to get committed and stay committed to bring it around. It's not going to happen instantaneously. And that's where we are with our own government. We've got to stay at this.
Thanks. Different tack. Worldwide, 2020 was a tough year for business. And some of the reporting says it was a tough year for BRI. Any thoughts on how the BRI is doing these days?
Sure. In what's happened, I think the one piece that I saw that was very instructive was a study done by Boston University that talked about the diminishing both amount and size of loans for BRI related projects. And that's absolutely true. And it comes back to that slide that we discussed having to do with the economy. And dollar in, dollar out. And so if China can't export, it doesn't have the dollars in reserve to lend. Very simple. And so also, the Chinese leadership has learned that some of its BRI projects are not successful. So they're learning, and there are modifications coming to their overall strategy. And so out of that 140 countries, what we're going to see going forward is certain of those countries are going to be targeted because they have large consumer bases or they're strategically located, and they will see BRI funding as we go forward. But I think it's important to remember that the Belt and Road is not going to go away. And the re the reason for that is we all have to remember that it is the crown jewel of Xi Jinping's foreign policy. And it has become the cornerstone of China's 13th five-year plan. This was way back in 2016. And it's now part of the constitution of the Communist Party as of October of 2017. And it's now enshrined in the National Constitution of the People's Republic of China as of 2017. So the Chinese are not just going to squeegee the Belt and Road away because there's this short-term problem with the cash that they've got. And there are, to be fair, groups within China that are clamoring that, hey, let's spend this money at home. But what we are going to see is a more targeted strategic move. And we always have to remember that the project does not have to make sense economically. This is where Morgan Stanley and Bloomberg, they often fail in their analysis because they don't understand it doesn't have to show a profit on a quarterly balance sheet. It may be a strategic investment for the future, like a port development on one of the Caribbean islands in the Americas.
Okay.
You follow me?
You got it. Different question. If you were an advisor to the current administration, what would you recommend that they could do and should do to steal the limelight from BRI?
Well, a couple things. The first is that currently, under the prior administration, some new financing tools were put in place. The Exim Bank was reauthorized. Under the Build Act, there was this new International Development Finance Corporation put together to help finance projects. And there is a program underway between Japan, Australia, and the US. I keep wanting to think it's blue chip, but it's something blue something. It's like a good housekeeping seal of approval on infrastructure projects. Now, here's the problem. While our government talks about whole of government and coordinating together, they still operate in silos. Sorry, it's just the reality. And so that the financing side of things to support American firms going up against the Chinese in various countries is very antiquated and slow. And so that whole process needs to be really tuned up. The second thing is that our embassies need to be in a position to immediately follow up with a proposal that an American firm makes to say that, we haven't looked at this completely, but we want you to know that we're behind this project and so forth. And the embassies could do a lot to help support American firm going after a project. And I think the other thing is stepping back on a very controversial issue, and that is the question that you've raised, Mark, is really going to be the debate that's going to exist in our country for the next 5 or 10 years. And that is, what is the relationship with China really going to be? What is the trade relationship going to be? And if you visualize a tree, I mean, what we are doing, have done so far as a country in terms of responding to the Belt and Road is we've been kind of clipping around the leaves, little minor things. And the issue is, are we as a country going to go for the trunk or not? And what does that mean? And among other things, it's going to be that's a very controversial, because it's going to involve an economic containment exercise that'll be very sophisticated to put together, and it'll involve our allies. And it may well be that in the future we're developing into two major trading blocks in the world, or maybe it's three. Who knows where the EU will go with this? But I think that the response to the Belt and Road needs to be in a better coordination and financial support for our American firms that are competing with these enormous Chinese SOEs. And the other part of it is to look at other policies that can slow or contain China's economic growth. And I know that that's controversial, but I'm just speaking the truth. I think that's what we really need to do.
Okay. And finally, my last question. What do you think is the single most important point of your presentation today?
I think it's the first slide. I think that understanding what China's ambition is and where they're going, if you really digest that and understand that, a lot of the analysis of both risks and what should be done, at least you'll have it partially correct. But I think that if you deny that the intent of the Communist Party is to take China from where it is, or where it was in 1949, to becoming the dominant superpower in the world, with all that that means and all that that engenders, I think that's the huge stumbling block that negatively affects government policy and negatively affects business risk planning, supply chain movement, and that sort of thing. And it also affects the strategy, business models of our universities and academia.
And I noticed you didn't bring up Jack Ma at all today. Congratulations.
Who is that?
You didn't bring up Jack Ma.
Who?
Well played.
He's gone.
Well
He's
played.
been squeegeed away.
That's
No
right.
more.
Okay, let me start with some of the, there's some couple questions and a couple comments in the chat I want to pass on, and then I'll get to the Q&A. How do firms like Tesla rationalize their investment restrictions?
Boy, that is a perceptive, shrewd question. Come back to my comments about the American cultural value. Elon Musk rationalizes that movement into China on the basis of short-term gain. Short-term. Understand that China is the world leader in electric-powered vehicles, EPVs. And so they've got a robust industry already built in China. Technology is already built. And so Musk is in there going to sell. Why does he want to sell? Because it's a big market. And he's been lured in there. And so for the person that asked that very perceptive question, I will tell you that in internal discussions amongst my team and others, we know that there's going to come a time when the Communist Party has had enough of Tesla, and they will come for Tesla. And Elon Musk will be selling at 10 cents on the dollar or 2 cents on the dollar, or there'll be some other move. But you know, he's playing in a very, very dangerous operation there. And why he did it? Short-term gain.
Okay. Next question, and you need to have a piece of paper and a pencil so you can write down a couple numbers.
Okay.
China has 3 trillion in foreign exchange assets and imports 2 trillion a year. So they can finance 18 months of imports without a single export. In addition, with an economy of about 15 trillion using exchange rates, exports are 13%. And since many imports are assembled and re-exported, this very much overstates the dependence of the Chinese economy. The US-China nexus is much smaller from a Chinese perspective.
Well, I'm not qualified to do the math on that. And so I don't, Mark, I honestly, I don't know how to answer that, but from a Chinese perspective, the influence, that may be correct. That may be correct. Remember, perspective is like that first slide. That's their perspective. And I don't know whether that's correct or not. That's something I would have to sit down and work out. It's not something I can do in my head.
Okay.
There may be some factors missing in that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, thanks. Next question, a really easy one. What's the percentage of BRI projects actually making money? That was a bit of sarcasm and an easy question.
Yeah.
Or do we have any idea?
I don't know of any that are making money in the in the American business sense. There are some BRI projects that are under construction and or have been completed, which provide enormous influence, like the construction of a bridge or something like that. And so that the payback is in terms of influence, not in terms of making money. So my short answer to that question is, sorry, I don't know that there are any that are actually making money. There may be. It's just that I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Next question. I've seen massive China projects from Namibia to Vanuatu and even Darwin, Australia, where they bought the port. The Chinese get projects built. How can we criticize these countries for getting things done they wouldn't get that wouldn't get completed otherwise?
Well, wouldn't get completed otherwise. I mean, what I would say to that is that you have to look at the necessity or the requirement of the country to have the project in the first place. And I suppose if you have a project that the country needs, unlike let's say a football stadium, but it's something that the infrastructure of the country really needs, and the Chinese come in and are able to do that, what you have to do is look at both the debt structure. What does that do to the debt structure of that particular government? And you also have to look at what comes along with that. It's not just getting the project completed. It's that China has offloaded in some countries, very culturally challenged group of individuals. So they're exporting labor and leaving them there. And then you've got extractive operations built around the project, a whole business community that is dealing only with the PRC. And so one of the things that has happened with a number of these Belt and Road projects is that they end up with a whole community of labor that the host country now has to figure out what to do with. They end up with some cultural challenges, and then they end up with the debt load. And so I'm not so sure that I would agree that just because you can complete a project means that everything is A-okay. No,
Okay, thanks. Actually, I'm gonna turn off the screen sharing on the PowerPoint so we can see your face bigger. Just a second. There we go.
Okay.
Uh, Next question. How have the Chinese been so successful in avoiding the label and opprobrium of being accused of 21st century colonialism or imperialism associated with the Belt and Road?
Well, that label has been around in certain circles, and it's there. They haven't avoided it completely, but I will say that their um, propaganda campaigns, their Belt and Road marketing and so forth have done a tremendous job of tamping down that understanding. And I think if we take the long view, we go 5 years out from where we are now, Mark, I think there'll be more and more people that will see the 21st century colonialism of the Belt and Road.
Thank you. Next question. Many of China's challenges in developing its five-pillar model of the BRI arise in lack of coordinated legal systems, which discourages multilateral investment in any or all of these five pillars. Are there efforts being made by China to study and provide similar models of US rule of law? Are there international lawyers helping China to reform its legal system?
Let me take that in reverse order. There are international lawyers who are attempting, and underscore that word, attempting, to help China reform its legal system. Um, uh, the reason I said underscore that is because the legal system will have to operate under the direct control of the Communist Party, and that's not going to go very far. So we, as an example, we had one American Bar Association International Section initiative in preparing a standard form contract to use in these BRI type projects, but there's no way that that's going to get accepted. The second part of the question has to do with, I think, dispute legal systems. Help me out with this. What was the first part of that question?
It was challenges in developing a coordinated legal system which discourages multilateral investment in any or all of the five pillars, these five BRI pillars.
Well, China has had policies with its AIIB bank and other lending resources to, attempt to encourage other institutions to invest in its Belt and Road. And one of those institutions that has been successful is the Asian Development Bank. They have provided some financing for Belt and Road projects, but as for a coordinated effort to try to get multilateral lending involved in these projects, that's not happening.
Okay. Next question: do you equate, although at a much larger and sustainable effort, BRI with the Petrocaribe initiative by Venezuela? With its great discounted deals on oil, Venezuela received strong support from Central America, Andean, and Caribbean countries at intergovernmental organizations.
Yeah, I see there's a parallel there. I mean, there is a there's a deal that Venezuela has set up, perpetuated, and coordinating with these other countries. It's I suppose a little super baby Belt and Road type thing that you could see the parallel there. Yeah.
Okay. Can you speak to what you assess as are the challenges China faces as it seeks to move forward with Belt and Road implementation?
Sure. The first is how long. Let me back up a second. always remember that uh, the Chinese culture is the one that built the Great Wall, and they did this over centuries. And so when you have a massive global project like the Belt and Road that is built into its governing documents and is the crown jewel of Xi Jinping's foreign policy, it's not going to go away easily. But the challenges that they face are, uh, I think, numerous. It's not going to be easy. So you've got the financing piece, which is one challenge. Another piece is that uh, people are starting to wake up a little bit to China's ambition, to their goals, and their methods of doing business. So there have been exactly 12 countries that have backed out of the Belt and Road. And so what China will have to do is keep the heat on by way of its information warfare, its media influence, to keep both proselytizing and propagandizing its Belt and Road and all the benefits. Um, and I guess the third challenge is there are uh, pushback on the prices that have been negotiated for projects like we've seen in Malaysia,
Right.
And renegotiations of prices. Pakistan is becoming increasingly concerned over its debt trap to the PRC. And so that you see that developing. And there are a number of other challenges that China is going to face with its Belt and Road, depending upon what type of alliances and competitive combinations are built by the Western countries.
Okay. I just lost my screen here. 1 second. Okay. Do we know the total amount of capital tied up in the Belt and Road Initiative to date? What are the terms for possible default and remittance of embedded infrastructure they have built in developing in other countries like Greece and Italy? People such as Matt Pottinger and others in the Trump administration called attention to this debt structure and the strategic leverage they provide China and the CCP. How far can China sustain such a strategy, especially since it might be considered a loss leader?
Okay, let's start at the reverse again.
Okay.
Loss leader. The term loss leader is comes back to the American culture again. That is that in order to be a successful project, you have to show a profit. That's the Wall Street quarterly balance sheet initiative. Um, and so when your plan is to achieve global governance, who cares if the rail system makes money, really, if it's strategic? Now, obviously, you have to keep all of this in play and in motion, and you only got so many dollars to work with. And so one of the real challenges that China has faced in its ability is getting other countries to pony up to support its Belt and Road Initiative, plug in uh, dollars. You know, the whole Belt and Road Initiative is basically a $1 trillion exercise, approximately. And I don't have the specific number as to what's the total capital invested to date on that, but it's a very, very small number compared to the 1 trillion. But there are projects around the world that China is doing and had underway. And so when the Belt and Road was initiated, all of the project managers scrambled to get in on the good side of Xi Jinping and called their project. All of a sudden, it became a Belt and Road project, even though it was already underway. Um, But in terms of the total capital, what it's going to cost, I don't have that number.
Okay. Next question. Many countries that participate in the BRI would likely prefer to take loans or aid from the World Bank, IFC, or other Western-led institutions. Funding for those institutions has declined as American protectionists have cut funding and become more isolationist or America first. Rather than try to discourage participation in the BRI, would it not be more of an American capitalist approach to compete and re-engage with the world and multilateral institutions to make working with the West more attractive?
Well, okay, so let me say that question assumes that there has been a lack of funding for multilateral institutions, and therefore the Western firms are at a disadvantage. And that is not the problem. The problem is this: when a Chinese firm, state-owned enterprise, goes into one of these developing countries, because and we're going back to fundamentals now, because of the business model, there is this fusion. And so the company is going in, they've got their financing already set with the central government. And so they waltz into a country and they can slap down a proposal, and it's a one-stop deal. We're ready to go. And the lending rate is really predatory. It's below what, significantly below what these multilateral institutions like the World Bank are offering. But they're ready to go. And so from a political standpoint, the government in a given country, they want to do the deal to make themselves look good. And so there's a real temptation to jump on the Chinese offer. The American firm, for instance, that's competing in an African country, and I know this from one of the tech projects that we've been involved in that involves Huawei. The American consortium going in does not have that kind of government support. So they go in and they make a proposal, and the government says, oh boy, we'd really like to have the American consortium put in a bid, and we would prefer to have American equipment. So now we get to the financing challenge, and the financing challenge for a big infrastructure project is problematic on our side. And why is that? That's because our government institutions that are going to provide loan guarantees and so forth, they move at glacial speeds or slower. And so that it's months and months and months before the World Bank or a multilateral institution or one of our own American firms makes the commitment. And by then, the Chinese have already got the project halfway done. And so there is a disadvantage. Let me give you one statistic that will help the person who answered this question. I was in meetings in the Asian Development Bank in Manila, and I was talking about with some of their lending directors on project initiations by the Asian Development Bank. And that multilateral institution, principally Japanese American with a minor share held by the Chinese, I was told that from the initiation of a project to funding, it runs about 7 years.
Wow.
So that's my answer.
Wow. Okay. Next question. In countries that are trying to leverage US-China competition for their own gain, economic, geopolitical, etc., what are some ways US businesses can market themselves in a more advantageous way?
Number one, get the embassy and the ambassador, US Commercial Service officer in that embassy, and the ambassador briefed ahead of time on the project, and so that they know when you are going in, so that they can have some nondescript follow-up letter that says, you know, we're not endorsing this project, but we think it's a good idea and we'll look into it, and you know, we'll have, providing it meets our guidelines, you'll have the support of the American government. So that's number one. The second thing is that American firms need to always promote our values. And I know this may sound old-fashioned or out of step, but American values sell. They really do. People want the American values. In many countries, our business sector has tremendous credibility in that given market, and in terms of both quality and of product, of follow-up, of high tech and so forth. And so that the promotion of American values is something that companies should never shy away from. That is a powerful marketing tool, getting the embassy set. And then the third thing is, before going in to do a project, it's really important not to go in, do a bid like you were bidding on a project in Des Moines, Iowa. You've got to understand what you're up against, and that is a highly cohesive, well-organized Chinese SOE. And that means you got to have your ducks in order in advance, like getting your financing set up and so far as possible nailed down, so that when you go in, you can at least compete on a partial speed level with the Chinese SOE.
Okay. Next question. How is the BRI perceived in China among the public? Does the average citizen comprehend its strategic significance? Is it surprising that China has been able to sustain such a significant investment program when many governments have retreated from foreign development efforts as populist politics have become more popular?
So the first part of that question is, how is the BRI perceived in China? And do they know about it? And you know, the answer to that depends upon who you're talking with. If you're talking with some rice farmer out in the field, probably not. But amongst the educated classes in China, of course they know about the Belt and Road, and it is it's an exciting example of China's coming of age and beating back the century of humiliation and moving on to the stage as a world power. And so the Belt and Road is a giant triumph for China. Now, to be fair, there are discussions now in this post-COVID world within China on, well, wait a second now, should we be spending this kind of money in other countries? Shouldn't we do it domestically? And that was the discussion that Mark, you and I had before, that what China's doing now is they'll reevaluate, look for the strategic projects, and we've already seen the lending for this year or last year, 2020, dialed back. And it's going to be dialed back for, you know, a couple, 3 years until there is a recovery. And that goes back to the fundamental understanding of how their economy works. Dollar in, dollar out. Don't have dollars, can't do loans.
Great, thanks. And I know you have to leave at 4 o'clock our time, so let me give just one more question, and then we'll say adios.
Is that what they say in Virginia? Is that?
I don't know what they say. What do they say in Hawaii? Aloha for everything.
Aloha.
Can the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation offerings be a good alternative for countries to de-link from BRI, or is the Chinese investment resources too sweet to abandon? Does the U.S. need to create a joint effort with EU equivalent?
The International Development Finance Corporation has potential. It was started with 60 billion in funding, but that's kind of a drop in the bucket. Their shortcoming to date, if I was talking to their senior leadership, is that you guys don't you guys don't know how to move fast. So you need to up your game. So that's a piece of the answer to that question. The other is that in terms of seriously competing on the financing side, the US does need to pull together and develop the Western sources of lending, and those would be joint allied efforts if we could get the Europeans to join, but they're already underway. They just need to be developed a little further with the Japanese and with the Australians. And I think the Europe is a wild card on whether they would join it or not, because the latest developments from Europe indicate that what Europe wants to do is to play a neutral game between the US and China. And that is going to be a challenge for our foreign policy teams.
Okay. David Day, thank you very much for your insights. Thank you very much for spending an hour and a half with us. We really appreciate it. We know you're busy, but we really value the information and the insights that you've shared with us. So since you can't see everybody clapping, I'll vouch that everybody's clapping, and look forward to the next time we can get together.
All right, and I'm going to be trying to figure out with my calculator the 3 trillion economy with 2 trillion a year and the net at 15 trillion, and see if I can come up with an answer for that. But
Okay.
thank you so much, and I enjoyed it, and aloha to all of you.
Thank you.